Welcome to the Who, What, Why podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Schechtman. George Orwell said that to see what's in front of one's nose needs a constant struggle. Think about why it's so hard. We think that we take in the information around us, analyze it, and make decisions. If the decision is wrong, it's because we didn't have enough facts or we misinterpreted the data. The problem is that that's not true. It's not the way our brains work. The events of the past few weeks have certainly shown us that. It was never true, and today less so, when information is coming at us like water from a fire hose, through pipes that are open 24/7, when TV news wakes us up and doom-scrolling Twitter puts us to sleep. There are many other forces at play. We don't always follow the facts. Sometimes we make decisions based on our instinct, our tribe, and simply the language that's used to present things to us. The cognitive dissonance between fact and feelings, though, should not doom us, at least not if we understand how it works and what's going on. To help us understand this, I'm joined by my guest, Gaurav Suri. Dr. Gaurav Suri is an experimental psychologist and a computational neuroscientist at San Francisco State University. He studies the brain's mechanisms that shape motivated actions and decisions, including value-based decision-making, emotion, and emotional regulation. He has a PhD from Stanford, an MBA from UCLA, a master's in mathematics and computer science from Stanford, and he's the author of a mathematical novel entitled A Certain Ambiguity. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Gaurav Suri here to the Who, What, Why podcast. Gaurav, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Jeff. Thank you for having me.
One of the things that I think that has been so maddening and frustrating over the past several months with respect to the pandemic, with respect to our politics, is the inability and the surprise of seeing people deny facts, argue facts that for which there is clear and solid evidence. Talk a little bit about that first.
Yeah, Jeff, we have the abiding intuition that human decision-making is about finding the right rational answer, and that we have calculation engines in our brain that, given certain inputs, are able to calculate the rational answer. This is how we see ourselves. This is how we see other people. And so because of that, we feel that if somebody is coming up with answers that we believe are wrong, they're just missing the information, because given the information we had, we came up with another answer. They're coming up with their own answer, so clearly they don't have the right information. So our instinct is to just give them data. It turns out that giving people data is probably the least effective way of convincing people to change their minds. And the reason is that our brains are not these rational calculation engines that give us the objective truth in all contexts. That's not what our brains evolved to do. Our brains are pattern finders. They find statistical regularities in our environment. They're not in the business of finding some objective truth. And I think that causes a lot of confusion amongst people who believe that, gee, my brain finds the objective truth. How come this other person's brain isn't finding that? And so we try to give more data to more people.
How much of that has to do with language, and how much of it has to do with culture?
Right. I think language and culture are really important inputs into what the brain processes. So, for example, a culture might give us goals. It might give us some ideals, and these ideals and goals might put constraints on our decision making. I think more than language and culture, motivation is the direct modifier of how we arrive at decisions. So we think that the classic intuition on decision making is we get some inputs, we process them, and we come to an answer. Probably what actually happens is that we have some pre-existing motivations, and these motivations shape information as it comes into our brain. And sort of guide an answer, it's very likely that we are in possession of an answer, and the thinking that we do, the cognition that we do, is really finding support for an answer that we already want. So our intuition might be that we think and come to an answer. The reality might be that our motivations give us an answer, and then we find the cognitive support for our preferred answer. Now, where does motivation come from? And motivation may have various sources. It may, as you point out, come from our culture. It may come from the social tribe we belong to within our culture. It may come from a lifetime of learning, meaning people around us, how they behaved. It may even come from the particular connections in our brain. Some people are more promotion-oriented, more reward-oriented. Other people want to avoid punishments. And so people have different motivations for a variety of reasons. But the one thing that's common across these circumstances is that motivation is a powerful shaper of our decisions. And our cognition seems to support, in large part, what our motivations are nudging us towards.
What about the idea of being able to maintain two different ideas in our mind at the same time? One that comes from what we want the answer to be, and one that comes from evidence and data that is presented to us.
Right. In psychology, Jeff, that's called cognitive dissonance. If we have two ideas that are contradictory of each other, people try to reduce dissonance in several ways. So let me just give an example. Let's say that I'm pretty, I've been a smoker for many years. I'm not, but let's say that I have. And I get all of this information that smoking is bad for my health. So these are two opposing facts. One fact is saying I'm a smoker, I like to smoke. The other fact is saying smoking is going to kill me. So what might I do? What people tend to do, and this has been carefully studied over decades, is they either minimize one of the truths. They might say, I'm going to die anyway. Or they might bring in some other fact, such as my grandma smoked 2 packets a day, but she lived to 103. And so the attempt in all of these is to reduce the dissonance. Now, interestingly, cognitive dissonance has also been observed in the animal kingdom. I mean, non-human primates also show a drive to reduce dissonance. So it need not be happening at this linguistic conscious level. But the fact is that when we have two opposing ideas, we try to change, minimize, or alter one or both of them so that we don't have to walk around with both ideas equally powerful in our minds. That has to do with the structure of our networks.
It does seem like part of the response to this, certainly as we've seen it play out with aspects of the pandemic and as we've seen it play out with our politics, is simply denialism.
That is one of the easiest ways to reduce dissonance. In the context of the pandemic, if one group of evidence or one group of people are saying, you should wear a mask, and that reduces your risk of getting this disease, another group of people are saying, no, it's weak to wear a mask. The way we're going to decide this is not by doing a detailed analysis of the facts about wearing a mask. That may enter into the equation. We may actually read an article or two, but the primary driver of this decision is going to be the social tribe that we've previously identified with. If our social tribe is sort of this science-based community, listening to the expert, we're much more likely to wear a mask. If our social tribe, and in this particular instance, President Trump was pretty visible saying, he may not wear a mask. And that's a powerful signal. And if I'm, let's say, aligned with that social tribe, I may find I may find motivations not to wear a mask and then find reasons to support my decision. And so a powerful dissonance is created by listening to and hearing from different social tribes. And again, it's not necessarily reason that's going to help us decide which social tribe we're going to go with. It is prior motivations. And in many contexts, these motivations are very powerful, and they sort of recruit our reasoning apparatus to find evidence in support of the answers that we know we want.
Recruiting that apparatus is kind of a gentle way to put it. In many ways, it's weaponized by individuals against other groups in a way that uses this built-in bias, this built-in dissonance.
Right, Jeff. What's weaponized is how strong the motivations are, not just to belong to one social tribe or the other, but to see the social tribe as the one which we don't belong to, as being deeply flawed, evil, un-American, and it's a motivation is not just that I identify with the tribe. The motivation is that I want to see the tribe that I don't belong to as being destroyed or owned or whatever word one might use. So what's weaponized is these motivations have been made so powerful, and the reason reason requires resources, requires time, requires a certain mindset to establish its slow acting influence. But if we are facing onslaughts of motivation of belonging to one tribe and, let's say, hating the other tribe, then you're right. The motivations have weaponized against any sort of controlled thinking to take hold. And what we use our thinking for is to construct clever arguments on social media that support positions that we've arrived at via motivated processes.
How much is trust a part of this?
Yeah, most systems in the brain, Jeff, are two-way. So people ask, did this happen first or did that happen first? Well, it turns out that for most things, A influences B and B influences A. And so it's this reciprocity, which is very common in the brain. We see this a lot. So when we're hungry, we're more likely to see restaurants. And so it's the hunger is influencing the perception, and to some extent, the act of seeing a restaurant is influencing our hunger. When we see these tasty-looking pizza slices, we might find hunger. So that's a reciprocal process. So trust. If I join a social tribe, I join with some drives, motivational drives, historical drives, and now as I've joined it and I've spent days and time with it, I'm getting more invested in it, right? I am changing the tribe I belong to, and the tribe is changing me. It's a reciprocal process, and as those interactive processes happen, the word trust comes to mind as a shorthand for saying, I have so much history. I've influenced these people around me to a great deal and been influenced by these people around me. And these these ties are now stronger, and we refer to these strengthened ties as a shorthand, which is I trust them and they trust me, and these lead to strongly influenced and influential groups which engender a great deal of motivation.
To what extent are these cognitive processes impacted by speed? The fact that the world is different today, that so much information is coming at us so quickly, does that put more pressure on these systems than the world as it was 50 years ago, for example?
Right. Great question. So it's probably accurate to say that the brain has multiple sub-networks, all of which interact with each other to come up with a decision. And a simplified view of these multiple interactive system is just to focus on two. So I'll do that, but I wanted to note that they probably are multiple. These are probably not atomic systems. These are interactive systems. But all that said, there's at least two flavors of thinking. One is fast, automatic, and doesn't take that many resources. So imagine that you've been driving for many years. So driving, for example, would be an automated process. The other process is slower. It's very it requires a lot of resources, attention. Distraction would really influence this process. And this would be akin to somebody first learning to drive. So, right, they have to put in all their resources. My son is just learning to drive. and so he, I see it. When he goes out on the road, he has to put in every last resource because it's not this automated thing that it is for me now. So our attention systems they require cognitive resources. They're slower. The brain networks that make this type of thinking possible requires sustained attention, a lack of distraction, and the ability to sort of logically build and continue thought for a while until we come up with an answer. So we're looking for errors. We're making sure that we don't make errors. It's like driving on a slippery road, right? So even if somebody knows how to drive really, really well, if the road is very slippery, now all of a sudden we're completely focused on not making a new error. And that we can't be talking on the phone or be really angry at our passenger and successfully do that if it requires all our resources. On the other hand, we can be chewing gum and be angry or talking on the phone because chewing gum is an automated process. So these things do require a great deal of sustained attention for them to work. Otherwise, they don't work. And your original question about the fact that we're distracted. Well, if we're distracted, we don't have sustained attention. If we're used to consuming information in small bites, we don't have sustained attention. If we have many motivational forces acting on us, we don't have the sustained attention. And our system that is this slower, attention-based control thought, I will call it, control-based thinking, it's delicate. Automated thinking is strong. Most of what we do is automated thinking, and that doesn't require that many resources. But the thing is that for new events, new situations, we need this control-based thinking, and we need to be able to have the resources to bring to bear so we can successfully do this control-based thinking.
Given our limitations as human beings then in processing that information and the increasing speed at which it's happening, doesn't life become almost full-time like driving on that icy road?
Yeah, I think that's a great metaphor, and I think that um, acknowledging that possibility, reality, recognizing that highly emotional um, emotional states or distracted states rob us from our ability to do the control-based thinking is a necessary first step in getting to being able to successfully deploy control-based thinking when we need to. One of the problems that's happened is that there's been an information proliferation, which is one would think a good thing, but there's also been a motivation proliferation on the internet. And so one can be guided by some initial motivation and then find a social circle in which that motivation, those motivational forces are really amplified. And they're amplified to the extent that they are constantly operating in the background and shaping what we pay attention to and how we pay attention, and really decreasing our control-based thinking, our ability to do control-based thinking. In previous eras, which you started to refer to, there was an agreement that what's in the newspaper is sort of an input, is a common input for everybody. And because it was a common input for everybody, we had to have a measure of agreement on, yes, we have some degree of trust and we find this information to be reliable. And the people writing the newspaper had to cater to a variety of camps that existed in the population. That doesn't exist anymore, because no matter what I believe, I can find a community of people who believe as I believe, and those people are going to amplify my motivations. And once my motivations are amplified, my ability to process data and exert control-based thinking is going to get decreased. And as you point out, that is akin to sort of driving on an icy road without the resources, because we're so distracted by these emotional states, and our shaping of our responses is guided by these emotional states.
And then talk about when these groups and these divergent points of view become too wide, become too extreme, what it leads to and what we've seen it lead to in terms of sort of the extreme of this tribalism, which is this kind of mob mentality.
Right. The essence of politics is looking at policies and understanding that different people have motivations that may differ from us and coming to a compromise. That's only possible if one essentially believes in the goodness, or to some extent at least, of the different tribe. If one thinks that these other people, they're trying to do a policy that's different from what I'm trying to do, but let me listen to what they have to say and let's come to a compromise. And that's sort of the art of politics. But that's only possible if I don't think that the other group needs to be wiped off the face of the country. It's only possible if I allow myself to listen to the other groups without wanting to, or without having this internal monologue in my head that the other group is evil or wicked or needs to be utterly destroyed. Politics can't start in those circumstances. So as you said at the outset, I'm a experimental psychologist, and I look at brain networks. But I'm also an amateur historian, and so I read a great deal about the American Civil War. And it's striking that where we are now is very similar to some of the influences that were in the late 1850s and 1860, because there was this notion that the other side is just utterly wanting to destroy the alternative. and this gap is getting wider because we're more and more in bubbles. We're less and less able to talk. We're more and more influenced by motivations that are ever stronger, and our attention span is less and less able to process information that might start sowing seeds of doubt in the views of the social tribe that we belong to. It's a dangerous time.
There's also the degree to which we then have so much at stake, both personally and tribally, in that particular point of view.
Yes, the stakes increase if we are in a de facto state of war with each other, right? I mean, if one group wants to destroy the other group, the stakes are very high. So in the news recently, we have all these reports of armed unrest, and if so and so doesn't agree with us, let's kill them. And one doesn't get to that conclusion without motivation that is really unsullied with any sort of doubt. And I'm a big fan of doubt. I think progress happens when one says to oneself, "Yeah, but wait a minute," right? That thought, that linguistic phrase, even, Jeff. Yeah, but wait a minute. If one says that to oneself, that's a signal that one is incorporating new data and thinking about the data in new ways. And if we don't do that, then we're in more and more polarized camps. We're further and further away, and the stakes are higher and higher because, aggression is a part of our very, very ancient networks. And if we are utterly convinced that it's us versus them, our survival versus their survival, we come to the conclusion that the other group should not exist. And I fear that large parts of our country are now in that state.
And finally, I guess what's most disturbing about it, layering on to what you're saying, is that because we have no historical precedent for a situation like this where we have information and movement at such an incredible speed, there's really no way to anticipate the outcome.
There is no way to anticipate the outcome, but we do have the ability to do critical thinking. I want to be clear on this. I think that critical thinking is difficult. It requires a lot of sustained attention. It requires a quietened motivation. It's slow. All that said, we can do it. And so we can figure out the consequences of these bubbles that we are inhabiting, and we can start to make policies that reduce this utter isolation and utter warfare that's descended on our society. I believe it is possible. I believe that crises create great danger and they create great opportunity, and I think that we are in this state. And how we react now, here in January 2021, is going to define how our next decades are going to be. If we can come up with policies that promote pro-social behavior on the internet, that promote the idea of listening to divergent points of view, that promote a politics based on compromise, then we shall thrive. If we continue to go down this path of it's us or them, and them being just other people in America, then that's not such a good idea. One of the things that's, for example, really galling to me is how the YouTube feed or how the feed of news or the Twitter feed is customized for a person is configurable by that person, and that person configures it based on their preferences and the social tribe they belong to, and they make it so they receive no articles or information that is against their current point of view. So all of the social platforms are configured to paper over doubt. And the reason is because people don't like cognitive dissonance, as we discussed. So they don't want to hear points of view that may require thinking. And thinking is hard. This control-based thinking is hard. It requires resources. So unless we can find policies that get people in the thinking arena again, and get them away from all decisions are completely colored by motivation. They will be. Motivation has always been and will always be a central part of our decisions. But if we can sort of slow that train down as we have in the past, and at least get these control-based systems to have a voice in our decisions, if that happens, we build a better country. If that doesn't, things will continue to look the way they do.
Dr. Gaurav Suri, I thank you so much for spending time with us today.
It was my pleasure, Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for listening and for joining us here on Radio Who, What, Why. I hope you join us next week for another Radio Who, What, Why podcast. I'm Jeff Sheckman. If you like this podcast, please feel free to share and help others find it by rating and reviewing it on iTunes. You can also support this podcast and all the work we do by going to whowhatwhy.org/donate.